Okay, cool. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Before we begin, I'd just like to say a huge thanks to our principal supporters. So that's the Schneider Electric Foundation, Maz and Becca. And obviously the support of all these organisations makes everything we do possible. I'll put the links to their respective websites into the chat box in a minute. So in a second, I'm going to introduce you all to Sam Kelsey, a recently returned volunteer under the joint EWB and VSA program. I'm going to be asking him a few questions, but as I said, if any other questions pop up into your mind as we go, it'd be great to get you to write them into the chat box, and if we have time at the end, we'll go through them. So Sam was seconded to the Department of Water Resources in Vanuatu as a hydrogeology advisor. So perhaps, Sam, you can start us off by telling us a bit about the work that you're doing.
Sure. Thanks for coming, everyone. It's great to be able to share my experience with you all. So yes, as Dane said, I was a hydrogeology advisor. So I was working with all things groundwater related, as well as drilling and borehole construction. So my primary objectives were to help build the capacity of a local hydrogeologist who worked within the department, as well as the drilling team. So that was 3 guys on the drilling team, as well as a department-owned rig. So the department actually chose where they were drilling and drilled the holes themselves and built the boreholes. So they were doing the whole thing. So more specifically, what that looked like, it was a lot of groundwater exploration, so finding good quantities of groundwater as well as good quality groundwater. As a bit of background, Vanuatu is basically like a big freshwater sponge, so it's all old coral, old limestone reef, which was raised from the ocean. So it's a lot of limestone aquifers, which are very porous. You can get a lot of water from them, but water also moves very quickly, so you have trouble with saline intrusion. So when boreholes become salty because they're too close to the ocean, as well as contamination from things like latrine pits when you're drilling near to where people live, for example. So yeah, it was to help my colleagues in finding the best methodology to try and solve these issues, to try and drill less salty bores, to try and drill bores with more water and less contamination. So yeah, and in addition to that, I was helping the database officer there, because in groundwater exploration, your best information is the bores that have already been drilled. So we were looking at ways to improve data collection, as well as to best way to build and access a database of boreholes, of groundwater information. So yeah.
Cool. So yeah, as I said, we've got a few questions that were sent in, so we can start with those. First of all, like what's life like in Vanuatu, and what are some of the kind of most sort of common and urgent needs or of the people there?
Right. Yeah. So it's definitely quite different. Like my life in Vanuatu was really good as an expatriate in Port Vila, so it varies a lot between how remote you are. But life as a volunteer was good. Generally, the work pace was very relaxed, laid back. You know, people were very welcoming. All my colleagues were very personable and very accepting of me to work with them. It's tough to make plans and to plan what tomorrow's going to be, what the week will hold, but at the same time, because of that, plans can also change very quickly, so it's kind of exciting. For example, you can be at your desk one day, and then the next day you have plane tickets to go to an island, remote island, to make some assessments. So yeah, it was a good life as a volunteer there. Yeah. So you mentioned some of the challenges for the Ni Vanuatu people. I would say the biggest one is where EWBNZ is operating already. So within the wash sector, we were operating under the assumption that basically 100% of the rural water supplies were contaminated at some point, whether that was either at the source, whether that was through the transmission of the water, so broken pipelines, or at the point where people collect the water for drinking, so tap stands, things like that. So it seemed to be everyone had enough food when it wasn't emergency time, because there was a big focus on people growing their own gardens. So food seemed to be plentiful, but it was more, well, okay, it's a different, when we get into like the nutrients side of things, not so much. But yeah, wash in general was a big need and was a big focus of the aid work that was going on there. Yeah, and then you also have the emergency response. Vanuatu is quite unique with the frequency it gets emergency situations, such as the recent cyclone, TC Harold, and the Ambai volcanic eruptions, which was last year, I believe, or the year before. So yeah, I'd say that would be the biggest needs.
Hey, can you clarify for me just a wee bit about what you're kind of meaning when you're saying that you'll assume 100% of the water supplies are contaminated? Is that a kind of you're operating on the basis that you can't assume that they are uncontaminated, or was there sort of data to show that actually there was a huge sort of problem within those networks?
Yeah, there was data to back it up. From memory, the number was 97% or something. So the department was very good at making, we have these E. coli bag tests, these little field kits. So it was quite easy to get a reliable test for E. coli contamination. So it was never a big surprise when we would discover contaminated water supplies. So yeah, that was done off data.
Right. Thanks for that. So what are some of the surprising skills you've had to develop since you started working in Vanuatu, and could you maybe tell us a bit about sort of how those skills kind of have helped you in your role?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I would say the biggest one would be language skills, like learning. So their local pidgin language is called Bislama, and it is relatively easy for Anglophone people to learn. It's a lot of similarities with English. So we start off our assignments with a week-long intensive training, and you can actually get to a level where you can converse with your colleagues sort of, within the first month or two, which really helps. And it's really, like, it surprised me, like, that I could do that and other people could do that. I was thinking it was a lot more difficult to reach that stage. And it was also an essential stage to reach just for the relationship building between my counterparts and I. With building capacity, you really need trust, you need good communication. So it's a lot of these, a lot of the soft skills, which ended up, being essential to what we wanted to achieve with my assignment. Yeah. Another one would be patience. Definitely learned a lot of patience. Island time is a real thing. I can testify to it. So it was about when we were working on projects. For myself, I would find I needed to not hold it too closely and have expectations that it would happen in my time, because then that would sort of be not a great place to be in, because it always wouldn't. There would always be something else which pops up, or a decision gets made, and then that piece of work gets pushed back into the next year, for example. So yeah, it was learning to I wouldn't say tread lightly, but you do the best you can. But if things don't go the way you want them to or expect them to, then yeah, it's just the way it is. It's yes, and capacity building. It's difficult. I believe I develop skills in it somewhat, but it's so hard to always have the mentality to never do the work yourself, to look at it in the future when you won't be there and say, like, will this be done again the same way? It's very tough, but it really is the most sustainable way. So yeah.
Cool. So language, patience, and then that capacity building kind of skills.
Yeah, I was getting there with capacity building. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything that you kind of wish you'd known, or that you'd learned before you went? Any sort of particular skills or knowledge that you wish you had before you first arrived?
I made notes on this one. I guess for me, I was quite worried when I read the assignment description that technically I didn't have the capabilities to do the assignment. So yeah, I guess before I'd known, just knowing the focus would be on, like the people side of things, the strengths-based approach, and not being able to number crunch like we do in consulting here. So what else would I have wished I'd known? I guess I did learn a lot about how messy the aid world is, with so many different players, so much donor money coming in, which is somewhat political, and there's no maintenance of capital, not much investment in training, and yeah, it was I definitely learned it while I was there. I don't know if it would have made much difference if I had known that before going, but yeah, that was definitely an eye opener. Yeah.
So a few kind of things there that perhaps could have talked with you before you went, that might have reduced some of those surprises.
Right. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. I felt I was pretty well prepared considering the two other EWB volunteers, Chris and Michelle, were already there. So in terms of bringing the right stuff and knowing about what my day-to-day would look like, I feel like I was pretty prepared. But yeah.
Cool. Well, it's probably quite a good follow-up question then, to ask you what sort of advice you'd have for anybody else who's also might be considering to do a similar placement.
Yeah. So like I said with that last question, it won't be your technical skills which will hold you back in terms of wanting to achieve the goals of your assignment, for example. It always starts with the people skills. I was quite lucky in terms of being in the capital city of Port Vila, and with the department there was a lot of decisions being made around me. A lot of projects were based from there, so I didn't have to create my assignment too much, but a lot of other volunteers, also speaking to the other VSA volunteers, not necessarily the EWB guys, they had to create their assignment. So I guess there's a possibility that you'll go into a place where they sort of expected you, they sort of heard about you, but there's nothing really ready. So you have to sort of start from that place. Yeah. And it's also an interesting dynamic when we look at it from their side. They're just having, like another person from New Zealand or Australia coming in and doing a short-term stint. So it's kind of a awkward sort of thing at the start. You think, like I had it in my head that it would just be, like smooth sailing from the start. my counterpart would always be available, and we'll do lessons and stuff. But it's, yeah, obviously in real life, it's a bit more tough than that. Yeah. But at the same time, compared to a lot of the other methods and approaches in humanitarian work, it's a really effective one, I believe, rather than the straight, I guess, donor funding. What I was saying before of, an example would be, so the department actually has another drilling rig coming, which was donated by the Japanese. So we have a brand new drilling rig, but we don't necessarily have the amount of staff to operate both of them, and we don't have storage for the new drilling rig, so we'll be sitting out in the weather, for example. So, and as a volunteer, you know, you're not, you have your contract with VSA and EWB, but you know, you don't have your personal interest of the private sector. You're not aligned to the department as well, so you're sort of just this neutral middle player, and it's quite a nice position to be in when you're dealing with, like, you know, different partners within your work circle. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I would also say if humanitarian engineering is what you're wanting to get into, it's a great place to start. Just speaking from speaking to a lot of different workers in like World Vision and UNICEF and other NGOs like that, a lot of them did start with volunteering, so it's a good foot in the door. You become quite valuable to them after you've, you know, learned the language and the culture and how things work. So yeah, that would be my advice to anyone thinking about going for it.
Cool. So I think it's kind of been a bit of a theme through a lot of your comments, is that you have to be flexible and expect the unexpected, and but also that this perhaps a good place to start. So kind of to wrap that up, and before we open it up to questions from anyone else who might be thinking away, you know, what can I ask Sam? Like, would you recommend it to others?
Definitely. Yeah, I would. Yeah. And yeah, it's a good amount of time. Like, I was contracted for a year, so it's not like a 3-month stint. So you can really start to see things through in a year. I'd really recommend it. I learned a lot. I think it was, so as well as, you know, like trying to do a good job for your in-country partner, it's also great for yourself. You know, having like some level of responsibility as a younger engineer myself. So yeah, you have to, you know, make some calls on things. It stretches you as well. So yeah, would highly recommend it for sure. Yeah.
Cool, that's good to hear. Hey, so if anyone else has got any questions, please follow Gina's lead and chuck them into the chat box there. We've just got one that's come through here, Sam. I'm sure you can see it, but for everyone else, what's typically done in Vanuatu to actually combat contaminated water? What sort of systems could be in place there, and are septic tanks an issue on contamination of groundwater?
Right. So in Vanuatu, they are just starting to use a lot of like in-house water filtration. So the big containers which you fill up, and it's like this slow, like micro, I think it's through a porcelain membrane, which takes out E. coli. So that is just starting to kick off now. It's definitely not as big as it is in a lot of parts of Asia. A lot of families start to boil water when they have become sick or when the children have become sick. So it's not necessarily all the time, but sort of after, you know, they see the effect of it, they boil water. But it also requires a lot of effort, you know, getting the firewood and drying the firewood and making a fire to drink some water. So yeah, but in terms of what the department is doing, to help combat contaminated water. So it's a lot of improvements to existing infrastructure. So, for example, there's a lot of open spring boxes, which are a very common water supply. So it's about going in there and constructing a proper spring box, which is sealed from contamination of people, of animals, of leaves, whatever. And also, I guess the big one I didn't have too much to do with was the drinking water safety and security plans, which they've been rolling out for a number of years. So doing a lot of assessments and more targeting funding into high need areas. And also making water committees within villages for the maintenance of water supplies. So lots been done to contaminate it. A long way to go, but a lot is being done.
So it's can I conclude from that it's sort of a little bit of a case by case basis, because things are quite different, but that drinking water security and safety plan sort of provides a bit of a framework for how you assess each of those.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Cool. So what kind of things do you think the Department of Water Resources are up to now after Tropical Cyclone Harold?
Right. They are doing rapid response assessments, so and quick fixes, they call it. So basically going in, doing assessments of the water system, looking for broken pipes, repairing the broken pipes, just getting it back online, because the need is so great. So not worrying too much about having it up to spec, but just getting it running again. I believe they're also doing water trucking, which we did in January on the main island as well. So it's in drought times, or I guess in times of when your water system goes down, they truck water on big bladders on the back of the trucks. So a lot of assessments at the moment, and also some operations with fixing too.
Cool. Hey, we've got a question here, sort of talking about the actual length of your placement. Could you first kind of explain to us a little bit about how long your placement ideally would have been, because we know that you kind of got cut short. But perhaps as well, if you can kind of provide some thoughts on that length, and too long, too short, and perhaps why.
So I got to the 6 month mark, which I was stoked about. I was contracted for a year, so I would say anything less than a year, it would be tough in terms of seeing the effect of your work with your counterparts, with capacity building. But I would say ideally 2 years. 2 years is a great amount of time. You can really learn a lot. You sort of start to be ingrained in their system. I think it just comes back on building relationships, and how quickly that can be done, how quickly trust can be formed, and also having a long enough time period to have exposure to all the different operations which the department has throughout the year. So
right. So too short of a time frame, and it gets too difficult to build those relationships, which is something that you've kind of touched on a few times.
Yeah, I think so. And because they know you're leaving anyway, so if it's in like a couple of months, okay. So it's about the perspective of it as well.
Cool. Okay, so another question here. What's roughly the percentage of supplies that are groundwater versus surface water sourced, and like what's the kind of split between household supply and community supply? And I understand you probably don't have those exact figures, but kind of off the top of your head, what do you think the situation's like?
I couldn't say the exact figures. from a groundwater perspective, I can definitely say it's underutilized in terms of the capacity that it does have to for a natural resource. Yeah, so I'm not sure of the exact splits. Rainwater harvesting is very common. It also depends where in Vanuatu you are. You have quite different climatic effects. Some quite low elevation islands where groundwater isn't an option. So it definitely changes place to place. So, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here into one. So what we're talking about is kind of what's next for you. You know, are you inspired to keep on in this kind of line of development work, or are you back into consultancies in New Zealand? And either way, what kind of skills do you think you'll be looking to take with you as you move forward in your career?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, I've already started doing some consulting part-time, which has been great to be able to pick that work up again. So as a groundwater engineer, I would like to continue with humanitarian engineering in the future. It's not on my immediate horizon with our plans. So I'm looking to go to Europe at the end of the year. So my girlfriend's doing a master's over there, and I'm going to look to do consulting as a hydrogeologist there. But yeah, I definitely got a great impression from Vanuatu and you know, the humanitarian field, and yeah, I could definitely see myself back there in the future. So yeah.
So have you, in terms of skills, some of the work that you've been doing on this placement, are there skills that you can kind of take from that to apply to that sort of future consulting career in New Zealand or Europe?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. For example, as a graduate coming out, you know, you're very good in the theory, and it's nice when you have a lot of time to make decisions based on science. You know, to research all the different aspects of a problem. But something I guess I would have refined over in Vanuatu is sometimes you need to you know, operate based on the information you have, and you never have the whole picture. So it's about making the best call given the information you have, and sort of that's just as far as you can go, and you have to, you know, be okay with that, and things keep moving. And so yeah, I would say that would be one. Yeah. Yeah, and also communication. Yeah, back on communication again. Just yeah, I guess I learned to. Well, it's different with a different culture compared to just consulting here, but yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll probably make this one the last question, but for everyone else as well, obviously you can see there in the chat box that there's a GoFundMe page up for the Cyclone Harold response in Vanuatu, and maybe at the end of this, actually, we'll give you a chance, Chris, to give us a bit of a brief on that. But yeah, so the last question for you, Sam, are you able to keep in touch and support your DOWR team remotely from New Zealand? Are you still connected with them, or is this it?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, which is great. So I'm not so much in contact with my main counterparts. I ended up working with a lot of different people over my time. So whoever you know, was available to go on certain projects, and I would go as well. So it wasn't as clean cut as the assignment description outlined. But yeah, I am in touch with Michelle, so a former EWBNZ volunteer. She's now with UNICEF at the department, as well as some of my other colleagues there. And I'll hopefully be moving into a e-volunteering assignment with VSA. So so they provide us some remuneration to continue remote support. So yeah, so I've been answering some questions around pump test analysis, and also they're doing a lot of chlorination of water tanks at the moment for the cyclone, as part of the cyclone response. So yeah, just checking some calculations on chlorine concentrations. So yeah, it's nice that I've been able to keep in touch somewhat and keep going. So yeah.
Oh, that's really good to hear. It's really good to hear you keeping in touch. Okay, well, hey, thanks so much for taking the time to tell us all about your adventures. I'm sure everyone's appreciated that as much as I have. I think, obviously, we'll have some of these sessions with our other return volunteers as well, and so hopefully you can come along to that, Sam, and because obviously you've all had sort of bit of the same, but slightly different experiences as well. So yeah, just before we wrap up, Chris, do you want to say something about your fundraiser you're doing for folks over in Vanuatu?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not quite as dapper as you, Sam, today. Yes. So thanks for that, Dane. Thomas and I, who was another volunteer with VSA living in Santo, we were flatmates in the end. I've just set up a Give a Little page there, which thanks Gina has put the link to. And basically, we're kind of being the face of that so that we can then pass it on to either the NGOs that are working with the NDMO or directly to the National Disaster Management Office themselves. So yeah, we'll be doing that later this month just to kind of support the ongoing response, which is going to be a long one. Lots of houses, water systems to rebuild. And yeah, so it's going to be, years in the process. Lots of people that were affected by Cyclone Pam, that's kind of still an ongoing response project for the Department of Water, even 5 years later. So yeah, I think it's going to be a similar kind of thing in this case. So yeah, sadly, lots of help needed, but also probably lots of more support needed from Engineers Without Borders moving forward as well. And we're kind of already in some discussions around what we can do remotely to make sure that is going to be a good response and also prepare for future disasters, because like Sam said, they seem to be pretty common. They're also struggling with Tana at the moment, the volcano and volcanic ash, which is displacing thousands of people as well. So yeah, it's pretty full on. So yeah, thanks for that opportunity. And if you can share around that link there to any of your whānau and friends, that would be awesome. We've already reached our goal of original goal of 2,000. So I've bumped it up another 1,000 because we've still got a little while to go.
Awesome. Good on you. Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming along. So we've got Kyle, Jules and Chris, our other return volunteers, on board to share their experiences too. So we're going to be posting details for that in the coming weeks. Keep an eye out and hopefully, yeah, we'll see you there. So yeah, once again, thanks Sam, and thanks everyone, and have a good night.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
Nice weekend.